You've probably heard someone say, a place is locked down like Fort Knox. Turns out that phrase is actually underselling things. Scattered across deserts, mountains, and quiet corners of American cities are sites where the security is so absurd that an actual military base looks almost relaxed by comparison. No visitors, no photographs, no second chances. Some of these places don't even show up clearly on public maps, and a few of them have spent decades pretending they don't exist at all. So today, we're counting down 10 places in America guarded more than military bases. Number 10, Granite Mountain Records Vault, Utah. Tucked into Little Cottonwood Canyon, a short drive from Salt Lake City, sits a facility that looks like it should be guarding launch codes. It isn't. It's guarding your family tree. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints built the Granite Mountain Records Vault in 1965, at the height of Cold War nuclear anxiety, and they didn't do it halfway. The vault sits under as much as 700 feet of solid granite, reached by a tunnel bored straight into the mountainside. The entrance doors weigh between 9 and 14 tons apiece and are engineered to survive a nuclear blast. There's an internal reservoir holding tens of thousands of gallons of natural spring water used to process and preserve microfilm, and the whole system was designed with earthquake resistance in mind too, since Utah sits on more fault lines than most people realize. Inside, humidity and temperature are controlled with the kind of precision you'd expect from a lab handling live viruses, not old church records. And what's actually inside is genealogical data. Roughly 2.4 million rolls of microfilm, adding up to somewhere around 3.5 billion images, covering birth records, land grants, marriage certificates, and cemetery listings pulled from agreements with more than 100 countries. The operation is run under what used to be called the Genealogical Society of Utah, and for a lot of people who died centuries ago, this is the only proof they ever existed at all. Entire villages that burned records during wars, entire family lines that would otherwise have vanished from history, exist today only because a microfilm crew photographed a ledger decades before the original was lost. There is no public access. Full stop. Not for journalists, not for tourists, not for church members without specific clearance. Entry requires a badge, and even authorized staff don't wander freely between chambers. Movement between sections is compartmentalized, much the way it would be at a defense contractor handling classified hardware. The church has said the restriction isn't really about secrecy in the cloak and dagger sense. It's about protecting fragile materials from dust, tampering, and humidity swings. Which is a very reasonable explanation, right up until you remember the doors can apparently shrug off a nuclear detonation. That's not preservation. That's preparing for the actual apocalypse, and figuring the family records ought to survive it too. The vault keeps growing too. Roughly 40,000 new rolls of microfilm get added every year, and since the late 1990s, the church has been steadily digitizing everything and posting it for free through FamilySearch.org, so the fortress-level security is protecting information that, once processed, anyone with an internet connection can look up for nothing. And if one doomsday-proof genealogy bunker in a Utah canyon isn't enough for you, there's a second, privately run vault about 2 miles further up the same canyon, operated for profit by a completely different company, offering similar hardened storage to corporations and individuals who want their own records to survive the end of the world. Apparently, when it comes to nuclear-hardened record storage in Little Cottonwood Canyon, there's room for competition. Number 9. The Vault of the Secret Formula, Atlanta, Georgia. Somewhere in Atlanta, inside a museum full of gift shop merchandise and free soda samples, sits one of the most theatrically guarded pieces of paper in the country. Coca-Cola's formula, internally referred to for decades as Merchandise 7X, was first written down in 1919 when it was used as collateral for a company loan, and for the better part of a century, it lived quietly in a bank vault. First in New York, then at a trust company bank in Atlanta, where it stayed for 86 years. In 2011, for the company's 125th anniversary, Coca-Cola moved the recipe to a custom-built vault inside the World of Coca-Cola Museum, a facility that now draws well over 1 million visitors a year. Then CEO Mukhtar Kent called it the perfect culmination to the anniversary celebrations, which is a very corporate way of saying we turned a soft drink recipe into a tourist attraction. The vault itself is bathed in red light, monitored by security cameras, and sealed behind a massive steel door with a palm scanner and a numeric keypad. Inside that vault is another, smaller safe holding the actual formula because apparently one vault wasn't dramatic enough. Company lore claims that only 2 senior executives know the full recipe at any given time, that their identities are never revealed, and that they're not allowed to fly on the same plane together. Presumably so, a single turbulence incident can't wipe out humanity's access to Coke. Whether that story is entirely literal or partly marketing myth, Coca-Cola has never bothered to clarify, which is itself a fairly effective piece of brand management. The paranoia isn't entirely theater either. In 2006, a Coca-Cola administrative assistant and 2 accomplices were arrested after trying to sell confidential company documents and product samples to Pepsi for $1.5 million. Pepsi, to its credit, didn't take the bait, and instead alerted Coca-Cola and the FBI, who ran a sting operation to catch the trio in the act, complete with an undercover agent posing as a Pepsi executive interested in buying the stolen materials. The ringleader was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. So while the museum vault is mostly a marketing gimmick, the company has demonstrated it's genuinely willing to prosecute anyone who gets creative about accessing its secrets. Here's the part that makes this one entertaining. You can walk right up and look at the vault. You just can't see what's inside it. It's less a security facility and more a very expensive prop, guarding a secret that food scientists, chemists, and hobbyist reverse engineers have tried and failed to definitively crack for well over a century anyway, despite dozens of published attempts claiming to have finally nailed it. Number 8. Bohemian Grove, California. Not every entry on this list is guarded by the government, and Bohemian Grove is proof that private citizens with enough money can build something almost as impenetrable. The Bohemian Club was founded in San Francisco in 1872 as a gathering spot for journalists and artists. It has since evolved into something considerably less bohemian. Every July, roughly 2,600 members and their guests, an all-male roster that has reportedly included Presidents Nixon, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, along with a long list of business executives, diplomats, and media figures over the decades, retreat to a 2,700-acre redwood forest in Sonoma County for a 2-week encampment. The club's own motto, "Weaving spiders come not here," insists business talk is banned on the property, which hasn't stopped decades of reporting suggesting otherwise, including persistent claims that informal conversations there have shaped everything from wartime strategy to presidential campaigns. The retreat features something called the Cremation of Care ceremony, where members burn an effigy in front of a 40-foot stone owl beside an artificial lake, complete with robed figures, torches, and a script that's remained largely unchanged for decades. According to the book Brotherhood of the Bomb, the Grove even hosted an early planning meeting connected to the Manhattan Project back in 1942, meaning a handful of guys in the woods may have casually helped kick off the atomic age between cocktails. In 2000, radio host Alex Jones and a cameraman managed to sneak into the Grove and film part of the Cremation of Care ceremony, releasing the footage publicly afterward. The club's response was less an explosive scandal and more an extremely awkward security review, since it turned out 2 guys with a camcorder had walked past whatever perimeter was supposedly in place. The site itself isn't hidden. Anyone can find it on a map, and Bohemian Avenue runs right past the property. What's guarded is everything happening behind the tree line: private security, restricted roads, checkpoints staffed during the encampment, and a club that has consistently refused to confirm or deny its own membership list, even after journalists have published leaked versions of it. A club spokesperson has repeatedly told reporters that the organization is private and simply doesn't discuss who belongs to it. For an organization built around campfire skits, that's an unusually disciplined level of secrecy. Number 7. Raven Rock Mountain Complex, Pennsylvania. If the Pentagon ever gets taken out, the actual backup plan is a mountain in rural Pennsylvania, and almost nobody outside the government has ever seen the inside of it. Raven Rock Mountain Complex, commonly called Site R, sits near Blue Ridge Summit, just a few miles from Camp David, on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. President Truman approved its construction in 1950, and crews blasted it out of solid rock between 1951 and 1953 in the same wave of Cold War planning that produced Cheyenne Mountain out west. Locals have nicknamed it the Underground Pentagon, and that's not an exaggeration so much as a job description. It serves as an alternate command center capable of keeping the Department of Defense functioning if Washington ever becomes a crater, complete with its own briefing rooms, situation centers, and living quarters built to mirror the Pentagon's own command structure. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the facility was hardened to withstand roughly 140 pounds per square inch of blast overpressure. The kind of spec sheet detail that makes you sit with your coffee a little longer than usual. It's self-sufficient, with its own life support systems designed to sustain personnel underground for extended stretches, and it functions as a major communications hub to this day, having received a $100 million modernization contract as recently as 2022. Government continuity plans have long treated Raven Rock as one of several relocation sites, alongside places like Mount Weather in Virginia, meant to keep essential officials operating if the Capitol were ever taken out of commission, and reports have repeatedly suggested it was activated, at least partially, on the morning of September 11, 2001. Getting anywhere near it means driving past a security gate along a rural Pennsylvania road, behind double walls of razor wire, with antenna masts poking up over the hillside, and warning signs that make clear photography is not welcome. A township supervisor whose district includes the complex once told a reporter he knew essentially nothing about what happens inside, beyond the occasional helicopter landing. When the guy who lives next door doesn't know what's going on, that's usually a good sign the security is working exactly as intended. Number 6. Los Alamos National Laboratory, New Mexico. Los Alamos exists because, in 1942, General Leslie Groves needed somewhere remote, defensible, and sparsely populated enough to safely build the first atomic bomb. J. Robert Oppenheimer picked the spot, high in the mountains northwest of Santa Fe, partly because he already knew the area from a boys' ranch school he'd attended nearby, and the rest became one of the most consequential science projects in human history. The Trinity test that followed in July 1945 was designed and prepared by scientists working out of this same lab, and the entire town that grew up around it was, for years, kept off official maps entirely. Today, the lab still designs and maintains a chunk of America's active nuclear stockpile, including the B-61 gravity bomb family and the W-76, W-78, and W-88 warheads. It sprawls across nearly 40 square miles, employs around 10,000 people, and operates with a multi-billion-dollar annual budget. This is not a museum piece from the Manhattan Project era. It's a fully operational nuclear design facility, guarded accordingly, with fences, checkpoints, and classification levels stacked on top of each other like a bureaucratic onion, and certain technical areas within the site are restricted even to employees who work elsewhere on the campus. And yet, for a facility whose entire purpose is safeguarding some of the most dangerous secrets on the planet, Los Alamos has had a rocky track record. The 1999 Wen-Ho Lee case became a national story when the Taiwanese-American scientist was accused of passing nuclear secrets to China, held in solitary confinement for months, and ultimately had nearly all the charges dropped, with a federal judge publicly apologizing for how the case was handled. A separate Government Accountability Office review found 57 separate security incidents involving classified information between 2002 and 2007 alone, with more than half of them considered serious threats to national security. In 2004, the lab's own director ordered a full operational stand-down after officials lost track of classified computer disks, halting nearly all classified work at the facility for months while investigators searched for the missing material. Somewhere between the fences, the checkpoints, and the guys with clearance badges, actual classified material has repeatedly gone missing at the one place in America you'd least want that to happen. Number 5. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York Gold Vault. Beneath the streets of Lower Manhattan, roughly 80 feet down and resting directly on the island's bedrock, sits the largest known pile of monetary gold on Earth. Built when the New York Fed's headquarters went up in the 1920s, the vault holds around 507,000 gold bars today, weighing a combined 6,331 metric tons. Almost none of it belongs to the United States. About 98% is owned by foreign central banks and international institutions that trust the Fed to babysit their reserves, which tells you a lot about how seriously this building takes its job. The sole entrance is a 9-foot cylindrical door set inside a 140-ton steel and concrete frame that rotates like something out of a bank heist film, forming an airtight, watertight seal once closed. Once it's shut, steel rods lock into place and time clocks engage, sealing the vault until the next business day. No exceptions, no override, and staff working nearby can't reopen it even in an emergency until the timer runs out. Security doesn't stop at the door. Reinforced concrete walls, round-the-clock camera surveillance, motion sensors, and an armed Federal Reserve police force all reinforce one another. And every movement of gold is overseen by a control group of Fed staff, plus an internal auditor watching their every move, with each bar's weight and purity checked and logged before it's shelved. That level of caution became a real geopolitical story between 2013 and 2017, when Germany's central bank decided to repatriate a large portion of its own gold reserves out of the New York vault and fly it back to Frankfurt, partly to quiet years of domestic speculation about whether the gold was actually there at all. The Bundesbank framed it publicly as routine portfolio management. A lot of financial journalists framed it as Germany, quietly saying it wanted to see its own money with its own eyes. Here's the twist. Unlike Fort Knox, which we'll get to shortly, this vault occasionally lets people in. School groups and student programs can book tours, provided they request tickets well in advance, meaning a class of middle schoolers has technically had closer access to the world's largest gold stockpile than most sitting members of Congress have had to America's. Number 4, the White House, Washington, D.C. The White House is arguably the most photographed building in the country, which makes it easy to forget just how much hardware is quietly aimed at protecting it at any given moment. Secret Service counter-snipers maintain a rotating presence on the roof, and they're required to requalify every single month by hitting targets from as far away as 1,000 yards. Underground, motion sensors and pressure alarms watch for anyone attempting to tunnel or breach the grounds, while infrared sensors do the same job above ground. Armed emergency response teams move through the lawns and gardens, often out of sight, trained to intercept threats immediately rather than wait for an intruder to reach a fixed perimeter. The airspace overhead is similarly locked down, with restricted flight zones extending for miles and standing authorization for military aircraft to intercept anything that wanders in uninvited. The Secret Service has never publicly disclosed exactly how many agents are on duty at any given time, and there's no particular reason to expect that to change. None of this happened by accident. In 1994, a man named Frank Eugene Corder stole a small plane and crashed it onto the White House South Lawn, striking the exterior wall near the ground floor. He was killed instantly, and the incident directly accelerated later airspace restrictions over Washington. 20 years later, in September 2014, an Army veteran named Omar Gonzalez scaled the north fence and sprinted all the way into the East Room before being tackled. An embarrassing enough breach that it triggered a Secret Service director's resignation and a full redesign of the perimeter fencing. The fencing itself has a surprisingly long backstory beyond that too. Thomas Jefferson put up the very first perimeter fence in 1801, a simple wooden post and rail structure, and the barrier has been rebuilt, reinforced, and heightened repeatedly ever since. Most notably, after that string of fence-jumping incidents in the 2000s pushed officials to add taller, harder-to-scale spikes that curve outward at the top, specifically to defeat climbers. What makes the White House unusual on this list is that it's simultaneously one of the most publicly accessible government buildings in the country, with regular public tours, and one of the most fiercely defended pieces of real estate on the planet. Somewhere between the tour groups and the rooftop marksmen is a level of layered security most actual Army bases don't bother matching because most Army bases aren't housing the president. Number 3, Fort Knox, Kentucky. Fort Knox has become such reliable shorthand for impossible to break into that most people who use the phrase have no idea how literal it actually is. The United States Bullion Depository, its official name, was completed in 1936 to house America's gold reserves after they were relocated inland from New York and Philadelphia during the Great Depression, moved by train under armed guard in a series of shipments that were kept deliberately secret at the time. Today, it holds roughly 147 million ounces of gold, worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $160 to $300 billion, depending on which day you check the market. The building itself is constructed from granite, steel plates, and reinforced concrete, ringed by a steel perimeter fence, razor wire, and, according to former Mint officials, minefields monitored by night vision cameras and microphones. The United States Mint police patrol around the clock and are authorized to use lethal force. And this is the detail that tends to surprise people. Nobody gets in. Not journalists, not most members of Congress, not even sitting presidents. The vault has been formally opened to outside visitors only a small handful of times in its history, most famously in 1974, when a group of congressmen and journalists were let in specifically to quiet a wave of conspiracy rumors that the gold had secretly been sold off or moved. Photographers from that visit produced some of the only images of the vault's interior that have ever been made public. More recently, in 2025, when questions about the gold's whereabouts became a political talking point again, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent addressed it directly, stating plainly that all the gold is present and accounted for following the routine annual audit the Treasury conducts. The depository also sits inside an active Army post that, at its wartime peak, housed tens of thousands of soldiers, tanks, and armored units nearby for additional protection. So technically, Fort Knox is guarded by a military base. It's just that the vault itself answers to the Mint police first, the military second, which tells you something about where the priorities landed. Number 2, Area 51, Nevada. For decades, the United States government's official position on Area 51 was that it didn't exist. That stopped being credible sometime around 2013, when the CIA finally, formally acknowledged the site in declassified documents, more than half a century after it opened, following a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that forced the release. Officially, it's a detachment of the Nevada Test and Training Range, tied to Nellis Air Force Base and located more than 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas. The site was originally chosen in 1955 to test the U-2 spy plane under a CIA program run in partnership with defense contractor Lockheed, and it went on to host development of the Oxcart program that became the SR-71 Blackbird, as well as the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter decades later. The restricted airspace above it is closed to civilian aircraft entirely, and the ground perimeter is marked with orange posts patrolled by armed guards, often referred to by locals as camo dudes, who by every account have zero interest in negotiating with trespassers and are authorized to detain anyone who crosses the line. Locals refer to a certain intersection near the base's outer boundary as the Black Mailbox, which has become an unofficial photo spot for UFO tourists who know better than to actually drive further in. The base hasn't been without its own controversies. In the 1990s, a group of former civilian contractors sued the government, alleging they'd been exposed to toxic chemicals from the open-air burning of hazardous waste on the site in a case that became known through the CBS News magazine that first reported on it. The government largely resisted the lawsuit by invoking the state secrets privilege, refusing to confirm details about the base's operations even in court, and the case was ultimately dismissed without the underlying claims ever being resolved on the merits. Employees reportedly commute in on unmarked flights out of Las Vegas, rather than driving in like normal people with normal jobs, a detail that says as much about the secrecy as anything else on this list. Of course, no discussion of Area 51 is complete without mentioning 2019's Storm Area 51 event, a joke Facebook post that convinced over 1 million people to pledge they'd run onto the base together searching for aliens. In the end, a couple thousand people showed up near the tiny town of Rachel, Nevada, mostly to party in the desert, and a grand total of 2 attendees were detained for trespassing. The base didn't even need to bring out anything dramatic. The Nevada desert and a well-placed fence line did most of the work. Number 1. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. At the top of this list sits a facility that was quite literally built to survive the end of the world, and still manages to feel underrated. Buried 2,000 feet inside a granite mountain outside Colorado Springs, the Cheyenne Mountain Complex has served as a hardened command center for NORAD since construction wrapped in 1966. The main tunnel leads to 2 blast doors, each roughly 23 to 25 tons and about 3.5 feet thick, engineered to withstand the overpressure of a 30-megaton nuclear detonation. It takes about 45 seconds for hydraulics to seal them shut, and if the hydraulics ever fail, 2 people can close them by hand. Inside, 15 separate buildings rest on more than 1,000 massive steel springs designed to absorb the shock of a blast or an earthquake, essentially turning the entire complex into a giant shock absorber suspended inside the mountain. And the whole thing is self-sufficient, with its own power plant, water supply, and enough food storage to keep operating for an extended period completely cut off from the outside world. Those blast doors have only been fully closed for a real-world emergency once, on the morning of September 11, 2001, when personnel inside were actually running a training exercise before the attacks unfolded and had to pivot instantly from simulation to reality. Deputy Base Director Steve Rose summed up the facility's reputation simply: "It's the most secure facility in the world." Given the specs, that's not really a boast so much as a statement of fact. Interestingly, the mountain's day-to-day role actually shrank in 2006, when NORAD and U.S. Northern Command shifted most of their round-the-clock operations to nearby Peterson Air Force Base, keeping Cheyenne Mountain staffed and ready as a hardened backup rather than the primary hub it had been for 40 years. In practice, that means one of the most secure structures ever built by human beings now spends most of its time waiting, which somehow makes it more unsettling, not less. Cheyenne Mountain earns the top spot on this list because it isn't just guarded like a military installation, it's built to outlast one. Fences and armed patrols can stop people. This mountain was designed to stop a nuclear war from ending the mission entirely, which puts it in a category most of the world's highly secure locations aren't even competing in. A list like this could easily run twice as long, and a few near misses are worth a quick nod before we close things out. The National Security Agency's headquarters at Fort Meade, Maryland, is ringed by its own dedicated police force and enough electronic countermeasures to make even nearby federal buildings look lightly defended. The Federal Reserve's own printing operations, run through the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, guard something arguably more sensitive than gold: the actual plates and paper used to produce U.S. currency. And Iron Mountain's underground data and document storage facilities, built inside a converted limestone mine in Pennsylvania, hold everything from Hollywood film masters to corporate backup records behind blast-resistant doors of their own. None of them quite cracked the top 10, but all of them would make most military checkpoints look like a formality. That's the list. 10 places built, funded, and defended with more paranoia than most nations spend on their entire national defense, hiding everything from alien conspiracy fuel to genealogy records to a soda recipe that a redwood grove full of powerful men finds less interesting than their own group photo. If there's a location you think should have made the cut, drop it in the comments. We'd genuinely like to hear it. And if you enjoyed digging through America's most locked down real estate with us, do us a favor and hit like and subscribe for more deep dives like this one. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe don't try to get a closer look at any of these places yourself.